What tense should I write my story in? Should I use past, present, or future? And what perspective should I use? Should I use first person, second person, or one of the many options for third person? These are the questions I'm trying to answer today on episode 3 of my Write My Novel series. Let's get started. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Órla from Write with Órla. You are joining me today from the beautiful west of Ireland, where I'm on my holidays with my family. You can see it's a little bit cloudy behind me, but rest assured it is still quite bright and it's still quite warm. So I thought it would be an absolute sin if I was to record this video inside on such a gorgeous day like today. As you will have seen from my intro, today I want to talk about different tenses that are used in story writing and different perspectives that are used, and how combining those perspectives and tenses in different ways can give the reader very different experiences when they're enjoying your story. This is episode 3 of my How to Write a Novel series, where I research different elements of creative writing to teach myself the best way to do it for me, for my story. But then I share that information with you in case you find it interesting or helpful in your own writing. I've already talked about defining the premise of my story, and I have talked about how I found my writing style. So as a brief recap, in terms of my writing style, I am very much a planner who leaves room for discovery writing. So I have finished the outline of my story, I have developed all of my characters, I've done my world building, and now I'm starting my draft 0, draft 1, where I outline my chapters and then I leave space for the discovery writing. So as I'm converting my draft 0 to my draft 1, I'm elaborating on what I've said, and sometimes I'm changing things up as I go. For the premise of my story, this is where I get a little bit, I find that bit a little bit tricky. I find it quite tricky to be succinct in what I'm saying. So I mentioned before that the premise is kind of like a couple of sentences that you refer back to while you're writing. You should be able to sum up your story in 2 to 3 sentences, and then as a reader that will tell you what you're in for when you start to read. It's like the hook or the log line. And then as the writer, that is what you're basing everything else on. So why do I struggle so much with the premise for my story, and will I improve? I mean, yeah, as I said, I am not a succinct person. I use a lot of words. I tend to ramble a little bit. So taking this huge idea for a story out of my mind and into the zeitgeist means that I'm still struggling to summarize it in those 2 to 3 sentences. I mean, if I was to say it now, it might be: a girl finds herself separated from the world that she knows. Not a girl, a woman, I should say. It's actually a woman. My lead female protagonist is in her 30s-ish. So a woman finds herself separated from the world she always knew and thrown into somewhere that's completely new and different. And finds herself catapulted into the world of science versus magic, political intrigue, and a battle to become emperor, I suppose. So that's kind of that's the summary that I have for you today. If you were to ask me tomorrow, it would probably be different. And the reason that summary or premise is what I have today is because I'm currently writing from her perspective. So my entire focus at the moment is on my main female character's perspective. I'm also doing a second perspective, so the story is dual POV, and that's from my male main character. So my FMC and my MMC, if I'm going to use the technical jargon with it. And I'm still early doors with my draft 1 and my draft 0, and I'm still changing things as I go, and that's where the discovery element of the writing comes in. As I'm writing, I'm thinking, well, I said I was going to do it this way, but now that I'm actually writing it that way, I don't really like it. And one of those things that I'm switching up and changing as I go is the tense and perspective. So I thought it would be good to do a little bit of research into different tenses and different perspectives, and have a bit of a deeper think into what they are, how they're used, and what sort of experience I want the reader to have when they're reading the book, because the tense and the perspective can have a really significant impact on the reader's enjoyment of the story. So that's enough of an introduction, enough of a ramble. I think this is going to be a bit of a long video, mainly because I don't edit and I've done a lot of research here. So I will try and be as succinct and to the point on everything as I can, because my goal is to explain the different concepts to you and then to refer back to my own story, to my own writing. So why have I bothered learning this? Why have I bothered researching this? Well, because I want to apply it to my own writing, to my own story. Let's start with tense. In creative writing, there's 3 main tenses that people will write in. There's past, present, and future. Those ones are pretty self-explanatory, but I will dive into them a little bit. I'm going to start with future because it's the least common, so it will be the shortest to get through. So the future tense is where you're talking about things before they will happen. You're looking forward into the story. It's used a lot of the time to build suspense. So it's indicating events that haven't happened yet. And it can build a sense of unease or anticipation in the reader. It means that readers can question if what they're reading is genuine prophecy, if it's an assumption that the character is making, or is it an anxious fear, something that they're anticipating is going to happen but might or might not actually happen. It's really helpful for foreshadowing if you want to drop a few breadcrumbs about something that's going to happen further on in the story. And it can give you a really clear insight into your character's intent and motivation. And sometimes it's used for prophecy and speculation. So I probably should have researched a story or a novel that used first tense as their primary tense, but I didn't think that far ahead. But I think future tense is really useful when applied in the right moment, in the right time. If a character is having a conversation, so if we take my main female character, for example, anxiety is something that she's dealing with as the story progresses, and that's something that she is hoping to overcome. And in those situations, future tense is going to be helpful for projecting her fears. Oh, I will do that because if I don't, this will happen, or I won't do that because if I do, this will happen. So it's that future tense, looking forward, projecting her fears and her anxieties on a future event. Moving on to past tense. So past tense is kind of the standard, well, it can be the standard narrative for a lot of stories. It's usually a bit more, you're looking back on things that have already happened. You're establishing the narrative at a bit of a distance from the story. You're not in the thick of the action. You're looking back on it and you're recalling the things that have happened. It can evoke a bit of nostalgia. So if you're thinking about some stories, it's like, oh, fado. And you get the impression of like the storyteller is describing what happened to them or to the characters, depending on if they use first person or third person in the narration. It can offer a lot of psychological comfort and hindsight for the reader, and this is something that I have been pondering, because if you're writing a story in the past tense from the first person perspective, where you're using me, I, if you want to kill that character off, well then where's the past tense coming from? You know what I mean? If it's somebody who is reflecting on the past and telling you all about the story that happened to them, but then they die at the end, who's like, is it their ghost? Have they come back from have they come back to life to tell you the story? Or is the story going to switch at some point from past tense to present tense? So I'm telling you my story now. I was telling you about what happened yesterday, but now I'm telling you what's happening in the moment. And if I disappear from the story, if I die, or if whatever happens, then the tense would have to change in that case. So that's something I'm kind of thinking about, and I'm mulling it over. Past tense tends to allow readers to focus on the plot progression and the flow of events, because they're kind of just following along with the story. It can create a sense of authority in the narration, so the story is recounting what has already concluded, and then it also allows you to provide hindsight and reflection on the story. This thing happened and this is how I feel about it now. That's how I felt about it at the time. So it gives you that chance to reflect. It can also support complex pacing. So you can have a non-linear timeline if you're using past tense. I'm telling you this story in the past. I went to the shop yesterday and I bought milk. But before I bought the milk, I had to go to the bakery to buy a cake. And I think tomorrow I will go to the grocer's and I will buy some eggs. You can mix up the pacing a little bit. You can also transition in and out of flashbacks a little bit easier when you're using present tense or past tense to tell your story. And then it also can enhance the genre atmosphere depending on the genre. If you're using like a historical setting, or if you're doing something that's more of like a documentary style or a diary style, it could really enhance that genre if you're writing in past tense. Another tense, the third one, which is the one that I'm also considering quite heavily, is present tense. And present tense is when you're talking about things that are happening as they're happening. I'm sitting in my chair in the garden. I'm enjoying the sun. I'm feeling the breeze on my face. That's all present tense. It can really pull the reader into the here and now. And it can force them to just experience what's happening as the story goes along. For example, as I was sitting here and I was saying, I'm feeling the wind on my face. Did you get that sense of feeling the wind on your face as well? Or did you feel, like I'm with her on this. I'm experiencing what she's experiencing as she describes it. Present tense can be really good at heightening suspense because you don't have the outcome. You don't have the foreshadowing of knowing what's going to happen. I'm standing on a cliff. The wind is pressing behind me. I'm at knife point. Am I going to go over the edge? I don't know. I can feel the rocks are crumbling beneath my feet. I'm about to lose my balance and topple over the edge. We don't know if I'm going to be okay because it's present tense. If I was writing it in past tense, I stood on the edge of the cliff. The knife was pressed against my back and I could feel the rocks crumbling beneath my feet. Okay, you're feeling that. I can feel your emotion in that moment, but you're also telling me about it, so you're probably fine. You're probably not going to go over the edge, or if you do go over the edge, you're surviving enough that you can actually tell me that it happened. So it loses a bit of suspense when you go into past tense, but it can be very suspenseful if you're in present tense. It also can give you that intimacy, that first person viewpoint, which can make it really deep and personal. I stared into my mother's eyes as they brimmed with tears. She pulled me close in for I slipped into past tense there. Let me try again. I stare into my mother's eyes as they brim with tears, and she pulls me close into an embrace. She squeezes me as she whispers in my ears, I'm going to miss you. Can you feel it? Can you feel the emotion of that moment? So that's somewhere present tense is really, really valuable. I'm not saying it's not as valuable if you write it in past tense, but I know as a reader, especially as all of the examples I've been giving are in first person, if I'm reading something in first person present tense, I'm there. I am the main character. I am the protagonist in that moment. Where present tense can get a little bit tricky for a writer is if they have dual perspectives written in first person. And I might talk about that a little bit more in a moment, because let's talk about perspectives. Let's talk about what is first person, what is second person, what is third person. I'm going to do it numerically because otherwise it'll be all over the place. So let's talk about first person. First person is really, really common in writing. It's when you use I, me. All my examples so far have been in first person, so that's probably a bit of a giveaway, a bit of foreshadowing to what my ultimate decision has been for writing at least this draft of my novel, that I am writing it in first person. And we'll talk about why that is going to be a challenge for me, especially as a new writer who hasn't done this before. So I'll leave that in there just to keep you watching, because you have to watch until the end if you want to find out exactly what I've decided to do and why I've decided to do it. So first person, it really immerses the reader in the narrator's mind. They are there with the narrator. They're experiencing what the person is experiencing. They feel the events and the emotions and the internal monologue firsthand. So it's not just Jane's stomach clenched with fear. It's my stomach clenched. Bit different. You don't have that middleman of the experience. You're experiencing it instead of being told about somebody experiencing it. It can give your characters a really distinct voice. And again, with the foreshadowing, this is where it can be tricky for new writers if they have dual perspective characters. And if you have any experience with writing or with reading first person multiple perspectives, you're probably going to see where I'm getting at in a minute. But every time you put something on the page in first person, you're developing the character. Every line is also character development. Your word choice, your tone, any sort of bias that the character has, it all gives you insight into their background, into their personality, into their thoughts and opinions. It's really good if you want to have an unreliable narrator in your story, which I do. I will be doing a whole video on unreliable narrators at some point. I'm still researching it at the moment so that I can talk with an air of authority, even though, let's be honest, I don't have any authority over this. I'm not an expert. I'm just sharing what I'm learning on this writing experience. But if you're writing in first person, you can use it to limit what the character knows or what they choose to share with you. And that is what helps build the unreliable narrator and the unreliable narration of the story. And you can also go on the psychological journey that the character goes on when you're writing in first person. You get to know them from the beginning, you get to see what their character arc is going to be, and where they are in the middle, when they're like the messy middle, when they're trying to figure stuff out, all the way to the end, to who they are as a person by the end of the story, how the story has changed them. And that can really help when you're trying to show like the level of self-awareness in a character, how it shifts as the story progresses, and what their motivations are, if their motivations change as the story goes on. Moving into second person is really, really tricky, and you tend not to see it that much. I only know of one novel that uses second person, and even then they switch from second to I think third person as the story goes on. I'll put the name of the novel in the description below because I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know it was an Irish author who was writing a story about a group of children who moved into a new town and had to assimilate and get to know the locals there, and it was done through letter writing where each character was writing a letter to someone, and we don't know who that someone is. We don't know if it's the same someone for all of them or if they're writing to different people, but they write as in you should have seen. Give me a moment now. It's hard to think of examples on the spot. I plan my script and I outline my videos, but then as with my writing, I do my outline and then I do my discovery as I'm recording. So I do have moments where I have to actually pause and think about what I'm going to say. So if I wanted to write in second person narrative, so it makes the reader the protagonist. So it's immersing the reader directly in the experience. So I'd be saying, you walk down the hallway, or you are walking down the hallway, and the lights dim, and a sense of unease creeps over you. There's a door at the end of the hallway, and you're reaching for it. So it's kind of meditative almost. When I think about it now, like now that I'm saying it out loud, it does give you that kind of meditative sense where somebody is telling you what's happening to you as the protagonist. And unfortunately, that's as much as I'm going to go into in second person, because as you can see, I don't know much about it and I don't feel confident enough in my knowledge of it to talk further. But what I will talk about is third person, because third person is so common in writing. I don't know if it's as common as first person or if they're balanced or if one is more common than the other, but I mean, let's be honest, who has not read a story that's written in third person? So third person is when it's he, she, they. So the narrator is talking about other people, it's telling their story. It gives you a lot of flexibility with the narrative because you can control what the reader experiences. You can limit it to one person's perspective, which would give that a little bit more intimacy to it. You can build empathy with that character. The narrator's only going to reveal what that one character is experiencing. So that's called limited third person. But in general, this author is existing outside of the story and is reflecting on what's happening to the character or characters. So as I kind of let slip, there's 3 types of third person. There's limited. So limited is when you might have one character's perspective and you're narrating what's happening to that character. So that might mean that as the narrator, even though you're sitting on the outside, you still only know what's happening to that one person. It limits your field of view almost. The second type of third person is omniscient. And this is where the narrator is all knowing. They know all the characters, they know all the secrets, they know all the subplots, and they can enter the mind of multiple characters, share their backstory, reveal their motivations, reveal what drives them. And this is so common in fantasy, where you have third person perspectives with multiple POV or multiple characters. And it's what they recommend if you're starting out in creative writing, because as the narrator, you only need one voice. You only need to be sharing what's happening to these people, but it's still just the one voice, the voice of me, the author. And then the third type of third person is objective. And this is where it's almost like the narrator is recording a documentary and everything is being told in a neutral way. There's no emotion put on it. There's no inflection. You're observing what's happening, but you're not reporting in your dialogue. Okay, so I've had a few interruptions and I have a horrible feeling it's about to start raining. So I'm going to wrap this up as succinctly as I can, which, as we have learned, is not my forte. All these different tenses, all these different perspectives, what do they mean for story writing? What do they mean for me and telling my story? So I have a story with 2 perspectives. I have my female protagonist and I have my male protagonist. The reason I chose to have 2 perspectives is because they're both going to experience different events. At some point they will come together, but for the first however amount of the story, they are going to be having different experiences. Both of those experiences are important though. They're both going to be telling different aspects of the overall plot. They're going to be developing the world in different ways. A big theme of my story is science versus religion. So one character is going to be representing religion while the other character is going to be representing science, and the development of the relationship between them is going to represent that conflict that people have, especially people who have a sense of religion and go into the sciences. Any sort of conflict that they might have with religious beliefs versus scientific beliefs. So if we take creationism as an example, if somebody is quite religious and believes in creationism, but then they go into, say, a geology science route, and I'm only taking these experiences because these are my own experiences, how do you balance the theory of creation with the theory of the Big Bang, the beginning of the universe? So that's one of the themes that I want my novel to explore, and that's why I chose to have two perspectives. That bit was kind of easy for me to decide. Sometimes I wonder, oh, will I have more, will I have less? But I think two is probably enough for now, especially as this is my first time writing a novel, and please God, the first time I get it written from start to finish and I don't drop out partway through. So then it comes the question of, well, do I write this from first person or third person? And do I write it in past tense or present tense? Personally, when I'm reading, I find if a book is in present tense, it needs to be first person. If it's in past tense, it can be third person or first person. For me, that doesn't make much of a difference to the experience. But I think reading I stared him down in challenge is a lot more effective than she stared him down in challenge. It just puts you in the role a bit more. I know myself, I'm a very emotional person. I feel quite deeply. So if I'm going to be writing about a character feeling deeply, I would want to write it from first person. But here's where the tricky bit comes in. If I'm writing a dual perspective story, there's a reason why most novels that have more than one perspective are written in third person. And that is because if it's written in third person, there's only one voice, the narrator. So the narrator is telling the story, it's describing what's happening to all these different people, but the voice of the narrator doesn't change. If I'm writing in first person, my voice is going to have to change from character to character. If my voice is the same writing from my female protagonist as writing from my male protagonist, it's not going to have an impact. A reader should be able to pick up a story, start reading a chapter written in the first person, and know straight away, oh, this is whose chapter I'm on. It always helps to have the name of the character at the beginning of the chapter, but so my two main characters, just because it's easier than referring to them as the male and the female. Una is my female main character and Rian is my male. If I'm writing from Rian's perspective, he shouldn't sound like Una. The same way as Una shouldn't sound like Rian. There needs to be a distinct voice. And that can be really, really challenging, especially if you're just starting out, if you're a new author, if you're a relatively inexperienced writer like I am. It's a challenge. But I'm also a glutton for punishment. So I want to take on that challenge. At least for my first draft, I want to write it in first person for Una and Rian and challenge myself to give them distinctive voices so that you, the reader, can pick up the story, open the chapter and know, oh yeah, I'm reading Rian, without having to check to see. So that's the perspective that I want to write on. And then in terms of tense, I'm flipping between past tense and present tense. At the moment, I think present tense is going to be more powerful. It's going to be more involved for the reader. It's going to suck them into the story a bit more. So again, for my first draft, I'm going to write it in present tense. And if I'm finding that that doesn't work, I can always switch. I'm still so early in the process. It's easy enough to switch between tenses and characters and perspectives, etc., etc. I've heard so many stories where someone has written a novel and they've gotten to maybe their second or third draft and they've received feedback from early readers or from their literary agent saying this shouldn't be in first person, it should be in third, or this shouldn't be in past tense, it needs to be in present tense, and then they have to go and rewrite the whole thing anyway. So while I'm early days, while I'm still at the beginning, why not have fun with it and try around the different tenses and the different perspectives? So there are my thoughts on tense, perspective and character POVs. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you learned something. Let me know in the comments what perspective you prefer. Do you like books with multiple perspectives, or do you prefer one? Do you like books written in past, present or future tense? If you know any books, here's a challenge. Written in second person future tense, let me know, because I would love to read it just for the fun of it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll chat to you again soon. Bye!